ladies and gentlemen. We are approaching the end of ISBA 2022, and we're concluding the symposium with the final panel discussion. Joining us here will be two virtual speakers, Dr. Fracassi from Coinbase and GMoney, a renowned identity curator. And we have two physical speakers here with us, Mr. Sean Leung and Mr. Lance Lim. This panel will be moderated by our Roderick. Roderick is an independent tokenomics advisor and designer and a CFA charter holder. He began his blockchain career as a fundraising specialist, but soon recognized the potential of blockchain technology to address deeper economic problems. As a result, he decided to delve deeper into tokenomic design, eventually assisting Parallel Chain as a tokenomic advisor. Today, in addition to his advisory work, he also develops educational content to promote awareness, understanding, and best practice on blockchain and tokenomics for the established business community and beyond. Let's welcome Roderick. Over to you.
Testing. Am I live? I'm live. Thank you very much for the kind introduction there, Jesse. So, as mentioned, we have two guests coming in virtually, and we see both of those feeds coming in. So I'd like to welcome remotely from the US, Dr. Cesare Fracassi, Chief Economist of Coinbase Institute and Director of Economic Research at Coinbase, also a member of the State of Texas Workgroup on Blockchain Matters. Also joining remotely, we have GMoney, a renowned NFT cultural thought leader, educator, community authority who is keenly sought after by top brands such as Adidas to build their metaverse and NFT strategies. Here on the stage, just joining us, we have Lance Lim, an experienced investor, consultant, and product development professional. He's had product partnerships for real-time communications at Google and has earlier growth equity investment experience at Polaris Partners, which at the time managed funds with an AUM of over $1 billion US. And we also have with us Sean Leung, an equity partner of global law firm Withers, with a specialization in crypto asset and complex cross-border commercial disputes, with earlier experience as a magistrate and registrar of the Supreme Court of Singapore. So we invited our panel guests today to share their thoughts on what the right balance or complementary mix of decentralized and centralized features ought to be for the next generation of projects in light of these earlier failures with UST, a decentralized algorithmic stablecoin, Celsius, now BlockFi, centralized lending platforms, and of course, FTX, a centralized exchange. Now, since each of our guests has diverse and distinct expertise, I'll be asking each of you one direct question after each lead response, we'll open it up for broader discussion and before we advance to the next question. So thank you everybody for joining us. Welcome. For our first question, let's see. Our first question goes to Dr. Fracassi. Today's centralized exchanges, business models, disclosures, and internal controls are under scrutiny. What decentralized tools or features do you think that centralized exchanges could use to improve security and visibility for their end users? And what do you think that regulators would be open-minded to concerning decentralized mechanisms? Would they be open to using these mechanisms for compliance reporting, risk regulation, or do you think we're going to stick with tried and tested methods for the time being?
So first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great question. I will start saying that, again, there is a spectrum of decentralization. It goes from completely centralized institutions to permission blockchain to DAOs where the control is in the hands of a core developer team or some influential organizations, all the way to fully decentralize the organization like Bitcoin. And also there is different type of decentralization, from protocols to DAOs. And so, yeah, I think it's important to highlight that it's not that just because an organization is more decentralized is better than a centralized one. Each one accomplish specific topic, specific purposes, depending on the needs of the organization. So when it comes to, you mentioned FTX. FTX is a complete failure of governance. That's the way I see it. Internal governance and external governance. So the big question is, do we use more decentralized governance tools? And my answer is, first of all, we need to actually use the tools that we have developed over the course of 100 of years in the traditional financial realm to address governance issues. If you look at the composition of the board of FTX, there was no board. There was no checks and balances and risk practices when it came to, moderating the influence of just one single person inside the organization. And so I would then consider the FTX case a failure of centralized governance. It's just there was no governance at all. And so my first response is, let's start using the tools that traditionally we know that has worked, not perfectly. You see occasionally still failures of governance also in traditional centralized institutions. So let's start using those tools first. And in addition, when it comes to on-chain governance, I think it's very interesting that we actually have these new tools that we can actually use. People talk a lot about proof of reserves. This is something that really you cannot do in the traditional financial realm. On-chain ownership is not something that you can go and look up all the addresses of all the people that actually own stocks, but it's uniquely true for crypto. And so when it comes to risk management practices for decentralized for organizations and tokens and protocols, we can use those. And actually, in fact, over the last several weeks, the company have thought about, like from Binance and other decentralized exchanges to use these tools, proof of reserves and liabilities. And obviously, there are different type of way to use on-chain data. For Coinbase, Coinbase is a public company that is immensely scrutinized. It's the only centralized exchange that is a public company. And we actually have to prove our reserves and our liabilities and basically all our figures to going through a severe and auditing process. And so I think that actually we, in terms of proof of reserves, we go far and beyond anybody else, for most part because of the scrutiny that comes from being a public company. But still, we're also providing a lot of evidence of on-chain. So my quick summary of what I think is important to take away from this is start applying the tools that centralized institutions have been using for 100 years, and B, also using these new solutions that are decentralized.
Thank you so much. So any thoughts here? Let's start with what we know works fairly well, and then maybe broaden things out later. But also definitely some interesting opportunities to leverage blockchain technology to create enhanced visibility, as we go into the future and figure out how to do that properly and rigorously. Any thoughts, guys?
I'd like to double click on what was just mentioned. And I think there's been an incredible conflation of centralized exchanges, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. Perception that these are all one big amorphous blob. I think that's the first thing that needs to change. And I really appreciated what was just said about the history that we have of financial institutions, proper management, proper regulation, and proper protection for users. When you think about it, these centralized exchanges, because they are so associated with crypto, you really need to disassociate that and start looking at them as really firms that are trading any underlying asset. It could be crypto, could be stocks, it could be anything. And so I really do believe that there is already a long track record of history, structure, and regulation to make sure that we can protect users in these kinds of environments, regardless of what the underlying asset being traded is.
I think there's a very important human element to, all these conversations around digital security, because you can have the best cybersecurity network. You can, do all your vulnerabilities testing, penetration testing to the end of the day, but it just takes one human error, one inadvertent or deliberate human error for a virus or malware to be allowed into the entire system, right? So there is a tremendously huge educational element to it, where it's not just about educating the personnel that work with the exchange, but also highlighting, the vulnerabilities that can come to attack the human element in terms of the operations, right? A huge part of the digital security breaches that we still see, unfortunately, has got to do with what we call the inside job, so to speak, right? Obviously, there's a lot of threat externally, but what cannot be underestimated is, unfortunately, an outlier within, the corporate governance systems. And so it is very fundamental to ensure that there are protocols in place to diversify the risk. There are emergency measures in place such that, a security net could be implemented almost immediately if, an internal vulnerability has been detected. I think there's another part when we are talking about digital security for exchanges, which is underemphasized, which is we are not talking about hacking or, deliberate malicious act from unknown hackers. We are talking about where algorithms go wrong, where trading algorithms fail to do what they were designed to do, or where trading algorithms rigidly insist on doing what they were designed to do, and thus failing to reflect to the realities of the current system, right? And so you would have enormous errors arising from that. And I think there's a bit about to be explored around having, independent algorithmic auditing, algorithmic testing, things like that. So quite multi-dimensional, I would say.
I mean, we heard earlier that there was some sandbox framework for possibly testing financial products. Are you aware of any such sandbox schemes being developed in Singapore to sort of create assurances around customer-facing products?
Well, not any specific examples in particular, but I think Singapore as a jurisdiction, I think since around 2018, 2019, the establishment, the regulatory environment has a sandbox regime where innovators are welcome, to work closely with the regulators to understand a bit better about the business plan and the technology behind the business plan, and to try to work with the regulators in a controlled environment, to test things out. So that's nothing new in terms of, the Singapore jurisdiction. But I think in terms of what's happening out there in the market, we do see a lot of, so-called beta testing before it's being rolled out, a lot of user acceptance testing, a lot of, structured environments testing run through, AI systems or AI programs, for example. But I myself have not come across any specific examples just yet in terms of, the Singapore or ASEAN region.
Thank you. Okay, our next question goes to you, Sean. You recently brought a successful case that applied property rights protection to a digital asset holder in Singapore. Following the dramatic collapse of FTX it appears that there's nothing much that investors can do given the revelations that FTX's assets have been substantially depleted, with billions unaccounted for. From your perspective, what recourse can investors seek today? And to help us in the future, do you think that we should be exploring ways to make legal enforcement directly effective and capable at protocol level?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that's the question that many investors who have unfortunately been exposed to the FTX collapse are asking now. And, many are thinking, where can they turn to? I mean, the immediate option, available to a lot of investors would be to participate, in the Chapter 11 process that's being carried out in the US. And, from my personal perspective, I think there is very little strategic downside in terms of participating in the US Chapter 11's insolvency process. And, you can work with your respective US counsel to try to get a voice in the relevant creditor committees to, get a front seat role to understand the liquidators' decision-making process and fact-finding intelligence. But I think the reality is that, the investors can't be too hopeful of getting anything at all, if any, out of that process. We all heard about the dramatic hack that happened a few hours after the bankruptcy filing, where close to approximately USD 650 million were hacked outside of FTX's wallets to, unknown accounts. So that's the depletion of assets. We also know separately that quite apart from the liquidator's role of trying to find out where the assets have been dissipated to, trying to use legal means to claw back the assets, to consolidate the FTX funds to distribute to the creditors, I think the number one headache that the liquidator have right now is in a battle with the Bahamas liquidator. Because from the Bahamas legal perspective, they are taking the position that the parent company of FTX resides in the Bahamas legal jurisdiction. And so the FTX Delaware filing is unauthorized or unjustified. It should have been done by way of the Bahamas insolvency proceeding. So you are looking at a battle of jurisdictions for assets even before we can get to the hackers, the unknown players or the known players, who have been dissipating. So it's a massive exercise for any liquidator. I think for any investor, lining up to queue, they are looking at, years, in terms of the process of getting anything back at all, which means that while having that queue ticket in the insolvency process is something that you can get and wait for, it might be an opportunity for investors to think about more creative ways to get some recourse. And already we are seeing some semblance of that. I think everyone here would know that there's a US class action launched in Florida against the founder and against a lineup of celebrities who are now being accused of, promoting FTX during the good times. So they're now being sued. They're now being tried to be made liable. And that's a great strategic play at first instance, because if you only have a US class action against the founder, that appears to be sitting too close to the liquidator's powers to claw back assets that have been dissipated, right? But the very fact that they commence a class action against not just the founder, but really people who are not sitting within the traditional class of debtors, it might give the class action some chance. Having said that, I learned all this from my US counsel, my colleague Chris Levine from New York. I'm not a New York qualified lawyer, but I think from a global perspective, there is a lot to strategize around where should investors be seeking recourse, right? Other than the obvious frontline war that's being fought in New York, Delaware, Florida, what else can investors do globally? Where are the jurisdictional hotspots to look at in terms of where the assets are? I think that's a lot for the investors to think about. In terms of the last portion of the question, I think in the case where we were successful is a it's a case that happened before FTX, so it had nothing to do with the FTX collapse. But we were successful in getting a court order from the Singapore courts to protect rights around, an important digital asset. Now, that Singapore court decision is not legally enforceable in the United States. But we have a major digital assets marketplace respecting the court order. And that's very interesting, even though from the legal perspective, it has no effect. But the fact that, the US-based entity respected the court order was impactful because from an optical point of view, it sends the right message to Asian investors that, hey, we are a platform that respects the rule of law. We are the platform that respects property rights. And, that's great from a business standpoint because it gives, users some kind of confidence, right, that their personal rights would be respected. So I think we are moving to a climate, obviously, with, all the scandals, all the collapses, what I call the natural evolutionary phase of, moving to the next phase of the blockchain ecosystem where the most responsible and innovative players continue to thrive. I think we are moving to a different cultural set of norms among the major players of the world where they would no longer say, you know what, I'm a decentralized entity. I'm going to hide behind my decentralized status and I'm going to keep silent about your legal orders. I think we are shifting towards, a cultural norm where the major players would in fact start to say, I want to be a global player. I want to be seen optically as someone who is credible. And so, yes, if there is a legitimate court order from, a respected jurisdiction, wherever it is, from Dubai to Asia to America to UK, we got to respect it, right? So I think we are beginning to see a shift, in that direction.
Super interesting. Thank you. So opening that up to the rest of the panel, any comments or thoughts?
I have a quick comment. So this is a complex case. So, in the case of FTX, you have all of a sudden realize that $8 billion are missing from the assets of the company. And the big question is who's going to take the hit? Which investors, clawback provisions. So people sometimes argue, oh, maybe we could actually have a smart contracts that distribute funds according to specific rules upon a specific event. Well, if such and such event happens, all the crypto flows in specific orders, which I think is a little naive because, again, there are a lot of uncertainties that need to be resolved during the bankruptcy proceedings. And so we have developed over the last, hundreds of years, we have developed a system to deal with all these different claims that can arise in bankruptcy. And so maybe the bankruptcy process is not as efficient as it could be. But again, it's a very complex problem. And also, if you want to implement some legal enforcement at the protocol level, now the big question is, what is the legal environment? Because blockchains operate at the global level, beyond any kind of legislation or legal boundary. And so are we going to use the US legal environment? Are we going to use the Singaporean one? Ideally, we would like to have harmonization across all the different countries in how we deal with crypto. But again, it's very hard to actually reach complete harmonization. And so, implementing solutions at the protocol level it's very hard to actually achieve that because of all these reasons.
Thank you for those thoughts. And that points to Sean's observation of, voluntary compliance being a helpful aid at this point. And it's encouraging that we're beginning to see inter-jurisdiction compliance, as it might be called. Oh,
If I might add, I think these are all fantastic insights. I have a belief that it's always much harder to fix something once it's gone wrong, right? That holds for crypto. That holds for business deals. That holds for relationships. And I think one thing that we have to realize is this is not just a problem for centralized options. This also applies to DeFi, right? The advantages of smart contracts being immutable are also disadvantages. They're harder to fix bugs. Sometimes once you find out something's wrong, it's too late. The money's gone. And so I think taking a more proactive approach is really where we can have some quicker and more rapid change. You know, the automated testing, the auditing, the things that go into making sure that these contracts are error-free will help us hopefully prevent ourselves from finding ourselves in these situations.
Yeah. And, being able to have a more subtle discussion about centralization, decentralization, immutability, things that have had sort of pretty dogmatic support, but maybe need to be examined on a more sort of nuanced and case-by-case basis. So, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, Lance. The next question is for you. So again, we're staying with FTX here. One of the talking points in the media is how the CEO charmed all of these high-profile and reputable VCs into backing them and investing in them. Given your own experience in investment, early-stage investment, do you have any thoughts about how these events change the selection and monitoring of companies, blockchain companies specifically, in VC portfolios? Again, bringing it into this centralized, decentralized theme, do you think that has any bearing on these sorts of evaluations, or, is it just going to have to be a really case-by-case, evaluation?
Yeah, there's FTX. We certainly have no shortage of sensational stories to talk about over the past year. And I think one of the things that the crypto industry has really fallen into is this habit of building up founders into these heroes that they lionize, which is in some ways somewhat contradictory to the utopian ideal of decentralization. But what ended up happening was every investor got caught up in this wave of red hot, rapid rounds of investing and funding. Niche firms, established VC giants, corporate investors, even celebrities, as you had mentioned. And I do think we will obviously see a change in behavior as a response to all of these negative events. Now, how does this affect venture funding? I look at that across a couple of dimensions. I think one, in the short term, yes, absolutely. You're going to see a slowdown in investment. You're going to see venture capitalists now being more cautious and selective in what they do, both with existing and new businesses. I think that when it comes to a venture capital and how they look at investment opportunities, you are going to see many of them now start to take a much more proactive, hands-on approach with their portfolio companies. Why? Because they're going to want to see what's really there. Are there other pitfalls that we have yet to discover? Let's go figure that out. I also think venture capitalists are going to have to change and shift the way they actually deploy their capital. For example, do you choose to invest in a new business that now may have much more attractive valuations than a year ago? Or do you choose to put that money into pre-funded companies and give them the resourcing they need to prepare themselves for better times? That mix is going to change. That decision process is going to change. Now, all that being said, I also do think that all of the red flags that have been raised, all of the negative attention that's being brought into this industry is a good thing. For any emerging industry, you have to go through these cycles of booms and bust. Why? Because it's these cycles that help to weed out companies with weaker fundamentals. And once that's done, you are left with companies that are strong, that have legitimate models, that can really drive success to a much wider group of users. Now, over the long term, if you really believe in this industry, I don't think that much changes. I think other than these slight shifts in approaches that I've mentioned, over the long term, venture capitalists are going to continue to invest based on appropriate risk for the companies that they are choosing to back. And as we've seen in the dot-com boom and bust, as I just mentioned, with these cycles of emerging industries, these are natural things that we all have to go through in order to figure out what's ultimately going to be successful.
Yeah, thank you. I really chime with that. I definitely believe in it, but I'm troubled by the fact that this technology in particular, is meant to be a conduit for value. And, if we consider any adventurous technology, the sort of downside was limited to a few participants, right? If we're building new transportation technologies, it would be those brave, adventurous pioneers who dared to face the risk of maybe losing their lives. In the dot-com crash, I don't know, I was too young, but I don't think the equity market was as broadly accessible as the blockchain space is. Here, the downside, when something fails, it isn't just a company that's gone under. People lose value, and I don't know. I wonder if you have a reply or any thoughts about how maybe we proceed differently this time, given that people's value, consumer value, is directly on the line as we try and learn and get better.
That's a great point. And I think the reality is early stage companies go bust all the time. The difference with what's happened recently is that they were early stage companies in early stage industries, and also companies that had custody of customer funds. And that's why the impact has been felt so broadly by so many people and has been picked up and covered so aggressively by the media. But I think the underlying mechanics of having a portfolio where you are going to have several strikeouts, some singles, some doubles, and hopefully a couple of home runs, that doesn't change.
Okay,
I'd like to add something to that. A question, or I guess an issue that I have with those comments is that I think when you look at things and you look at, let's say, the macro overall picture, and you take a look at how interest rates have literally been trending higher over the last years, what we've seen in terms of crypto and the pullback in space is endemic of everything we've seen across the macro space, right? So when you say that you don't think that the dot-com bubble affected, let's say, the general consumer, I mean, I would argue against that. They're saying that, yes, the stock market had a massive pullback in 2000 and 2001. And I would say, relatively speaking, the pullback in crypto has been generally in line with what we've seen within tech, right? You see all the FANG stocks down significantly off their highs. And I think what we're seeing over here, specifically within crypto, is just endemic of the overall macro picture. So when you're looking at allocating capital as a VC going forward, you're obviously looking at what the discount rate is and what the risk-free rate is. And that's how you're beginning to allocate decision-making, right? And obviously, to all the points that were just made, is that investors will begin to probably do better due diligence going forward. Whereas, when money is easy and everything is going up, people probably get lax, right? And there's a lot of FOMO that gets involved with regards to making investments. But I do think this is just normal economic business cycles. But what you're seeing with crypto specifically compared to the broader macro landscape is that there isn't necessarily the Fed put that gets involved that you see that generally supports equity valuations.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right that there are macro factors that they're steering everything. I agree with that. Yeah, but it definitely seems to be the case that there are a lot of ventures that are just no longer a going concern. And that is, if you compare that to tech indices, those companies are still going even if they've lost a lot of value. But you're absolutely right. These new times are going to make everyone reassess their investment decisions, and in a way that's good. I saw an article in the FT that said money's expensive again. If it's expensive, you're going to think twice about where you're going to put it. So there may be a silver lining in that. GMoney, The next question is for you. We heard from Sean that digital assets aren't ours to do what we will under all circumstances. There are now willing and complying parties to apply legal rulings or abide by them. We know that a lot of digital art is not stored in a decentralized way. NFT holders are vulnerable to losing the underlying digital content of those NFTs. And lots of everyday users now feel worried about the safety of their funds on exchanges today. What do you think that users really care about at the end of the day? There's, you know, in the blockchain community, it's easy to stay close to people who are very fanatical and excited about all of these decentralization objectives. What do you think the users finally care about at the end of the day? And what kind of products and designs do you think are going to be well received and popular with them?
Right. I think that's a really good question. When I take a look at that and I look at, first off, what you said with regards to the non-decentralized storage, I think that that's an issue of technology. And I think that as the technology gets better and compression gets better and the cost of storing things on chain becomes cheaper, we'll begin to see more and more assets come on chain. So I think over the long run, I think that issue of things not being stored on chain becomes a non-event as that cost goes down and technology improves to make that more efficient. But one of the really interesting things that I've been monitoring, especially over the last 30 to 45 days with the FTX collapse, is how the NFT market itself has been pretty insulated in terms of liquidations and in terms of people being forced out of it. Now, I think there's two things for that. I think one is there's not as much leverage in the system for NFTs because, the lending markets aren't as large. I think they're small and growing. And I think in the next bull cycle, we'll probably see a lot of it being led from leverage that's originating out of the NFT market. But I do think that the fact that there isn't leverage in the system right now kept it kind of insulated. But then also that there is a lot of self-custody that happens in the NFT space for the simple fact that a lot of these centralized exchanges and these centralized custodians didn't even really have a custodial solution for NFTs until maybe the beginning of this past year. And at that point, I think there was already a lot of market adoption for self-custody. And I do think it's, as I take a look at the dynamics and, when you're looking at, DeFi and, how people have been on a witch hunt for what's the next shoe to drop. And you compare that to the NFT market where, prices are going up and down. I think the prices are more affected by liquidity of people that got liquidated in the FTX debacle, more so than, just the general market in fear and fire selling their assets. I do believe that, especially when it comes to the NFT space, ultimately, people do care about that sovereign self-custody. I think that is one of the main tenets of crypto in general. I do think that one of the beautiful things with crypto is that you have that range, right? You can do full self-custody or you can do utilizing a custodian and you can, utilize any scale of that gray in between. So I think it really depends on each user. And I think that you're going to see a mix of some people that are 100% self-custody, some people that want the ease of access to their wallet, which obviously during good times when there's no real panic within the system is fine. But really it comes down to an issue when there is a loss of trust, mainly from centralized entities that, because the system is only as strong as its weakest link. That's when you, I think, see a huge move towards self-custody. And I think this is really evident in the fact that I believe it was Ledger that, has been reporting all-time high sales over the last, 30 days or so.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that and for giving us a perspective on how the NFT space is subject to different dynamics here. So this is interesting. What we get from that question is that you think that self-custody, a pitch or a feature that's classically crypto is in. It's something that people value and that people remain attached to in light of this debacle. But there's another sort of feature of the crypto space where people enjoy the freedom of pseudonymity, and you have built a really strong and impressive brand by speaking through your NFT avatar. Now, I hope I'm not making any spoilers here, but I believe you revealed yourself for the first time. You revealed your human likeness to the world. And I'm just wondering, given how long you built up this brand, speaking through your blockchain avatar, what led you to think that that's the right decision to take in these times?
Yeah, I think that where we are currently in the cycle, I think that the crypto space is in need of strong and visible leaders that are here, that are building, to the point that was made earlier, of just trying not to idolize people in the space, but rather to bring people together, right? And that really was one of those things. I'm currently in Miami and our Basel, and I'm running an activation here, and one of those things is interacting with people in the community that I have relationships with in a digital format. And I very much believe that even though we're all sitting here behind a screen or interacting, whether through email or Twitter or Discord or whatever have you, there is a human element, and there's no substitute for that human connection. And I really believe, especially at times like this, when people are questioning their faith in the system, whether this technology really will be as disruptive as some of us think, myself included. I think this will be a completely revolutionary technology for humanity going forward. I think now is the time to kind of bond together and really dig in and, pick up from the ashes of, this current, what, to me appears to be fraud that has plagued some of the bad actors in the space, and really build something that I personally want for the space to be sustainable long term.
Thank you so much. Before we open it to the floor, any other add-ons or comments? Okay, so we're taking questions from the audience now. Everyone is cooked. Sorry, was that a question there at the back? Yes, Alice, please.
Well, I'm probably the only Zoomer in this room. I'm probably the only person under, well, maybe the only person under 25. I think for new technology to be adopted, you need to excite young people. And NFTs try to do that. But I feel like, do you agree with me that the demographic of this whole NFT blockchain excitement, even though it's relatively young compared to the average person, it's more like 25 to 35, but people under 25 are actually very tech savvy, but also very blockchain and very NFT skeptical. It's almost like a joke to a lot of people under 25, this whole NFT thing. And what would you say to them?
For you, GMoney?
Yeah. So I very much disagree with that for the reason that, the way I got into the NFT space was I started playing Fortnite, and I started playing with kids who were 10, 11, 12 years old. And the first thing that they asked me was, what skins did you buy? And now these skins don't give you any special powers. They don't do anything in the game other than change how you look. And they would spend all their money on it, right? Or all their parents' money on it. And so I realized really early that, wow, that kid who's 10, 11, 12 years old today is going to be 20, 21, 22 in 10 years. And they're going to be totally okay with owning a purely digital asset. Now, in the future where we're spending more and more of our time in a digital format, you're going to want to own the assets that you spend your money on, right? So if you go out and you buy a t-shirt right now from any store, it is yours. You can give it away. You can throw it away. You can wear it, for 50 years. But in our current system, the way digital assets lives, let's say within the Fortnite ecosystem, if you violate those terms of service, not only are you kicked out from playing the game, but you lose all of your assets, right? And, there's that story that I'm sure a lot of people have heard that Vitalik, I believe he was playing World of Warcraft and he found a bug in the game and he mined a ton of gold. And I think the devs found out that he was doing that. And not only did they kick him out, they took all of his assets. And that was one of the reasons that he ended up being on the founding team of Ethereum and all those things. So I think ultimately it comes down to in education, more of, let's say that bridge of maybe 25 to 45 at the moment. But I think if you talk to anybody under the age of 15 to 18 and under, they inherently understand digital asset ownership, even though maybe it might be within a closed garden at the moment. But I think over the long term, as most humans want, to have full ownership over their assets over the long run. And I think that is probably something over the next few decades we see as one of those issues that becomes a human rights issue long term.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that insight. Yeah, sorry, Lim.
I need to play more World of Warcraft. That's my lesson. No, I wanted to add something to that. I think when you target a certain demographic, sometimes that could work phenomenally well. But then sometimes you're also waiting for that demographic to mature in order to drive mass adoption. And one thing I learned earlier today, courtesy of the Mouse House, was that even though you may target different demographics, the true magic is when you're really able to appeal to everyone in one way or another. And I think that's an opportunity for us right now. As people look away from centralized offerings and more towards decentralized options, the real magic is figuring out how to bring that ease of access, that convenience to DeFi in order to give users who may not care about self-custody, who may not even care about blockchain, who may only care about value and what they get out of it, but to make it not only easier for them to adopt these things, but potentially as or more appealing from safer and easier to understand centralized options.
I just wanted to add that, I had the privilege of convincing the Singapore High Court judge of recognizing NFT as a form of property for the very first time. And the judge is not younger than I am. So I feel like NFTs, there's a lot of talk about value, right? And I feel like NFTs are very much age agnostic, right? Because it's not just about, purchasing a picture. It's about appreciation of art. It's about being part of an exclusive community, having access to opportunities and context that comes along with being a proud owner of the NFT. And I think that speaks to people from across different ages, right?
Any more questions from the audience? Oh, sorry, we got another rejoinder.
One thing I'll also add to that is everything in the real world is an NFT. And so when you think about it from that way and you realize that, then you understand why NFTs should be considered digital property.
Yeah, I came across a short video where Keanu Reeves says he's round for dinner with a friend and they try and explain the Matrix to the young daughter. And he's like, well, it's a world where everyone's living in a virtual reality, but they don't know it. And they try and get it back. And the little girl's just puzzled. And she's like, why do they care? It's like, there's a digital nativeness to digital experiences that I just don't think are being viewed as being as separate as the way we might see them. And that helps us understand the way that other generations are moving in and experiencing these digital spaces. Just saying, well, it's like our real world. Everything's an asset. Why should our digital experiences be different to how we govern ourselves in the physical world? So thanks for that. Any more questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi. Yes, going on for one thing you said about the legal things. When I speak to colleagues in the insurance industry, they see a growth area is ensuring NFTs, ensuring adverse behavior of avatars in the metaverse. But when you get to the recourse or anything that happens, it always comes back to a physical human court. So what's your view of the regulation, the insurance, and as you said, the recourse? We hear about lots of regulations using the smart contracts within all this, but at the end of the day, it has to come back these days to a physical court.
I think you're best suited to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think there's different facets to your question, right? I mean, at first instance, I would say that if you look at the major digital assets exchanges and marketplaces around the world, you would see it is, a common thing now in their standard terms and conditions to say that they are obliged to comply with an order of court, and the court is not defined. So if there is a court order compelling, the exchange or the marketplace to shift the crypto assets to a certain wallet, then, at first instance, they would be expected to comply. But there's also a lot of talk about, how, arbitrators or decision makers, even judges perhaps, may be empowered with the powers to amend a smart contract or to revoke a smart contract. That would be revolutionary, right? But that would also overcome, the practical challenges that we face in terms of enforcement. I spoke earlier on about voluntary compliance and how that could be sometimes great optics for business. So I will not repeat that point here. There is some exploration in the space around, and what I'm going to say next is going to be slightly controversial, which is, in your classic old school property dispute, if you bought a property in which you have no funds to purchase, you would expect the banker to get a court order to seize your property. And you would expect the banker's lawyers to come to the physical property with a court-appointed sheriff to break into the door, right? To take what belongs to them, right? There is some exploration now as to what extent can that be done in the digital asset space where, with the powers of the court, the enforcement powers are wide enough to say the court sheriff could be working with digital security experts, to compel access into a wallet, to extract the crypto assets by force of law, right? Not entirely hacking the hackers, but, trending in that direction. So there are many different forms of enforcement facets that we are looking at. And obviously the last bit is that the movement of digital assets on the blockchain is transparent and public, right? The final piece of your question is, in terms of having the decision maker, whether is it a judge, or a arbitrator, should that be a human decision maker, or should that be an AI decision maker, or should that be, some form of derivative from code programmed in a smart contract? At least from the technical point of view, 150 countries all over the world have signed on to what is called the New York Convention. The New York Convention means that if you are a party to the convention, no matter which country you are, you will be respecting an international arbitration award, right? And there are certain elements that comes with an award which seems to suggest that you need to have a human being having decided that decision, right? So I think that's a great question, which is if you have an outcome, a so-called quasi-legal outcome from, the processes of a smart contract, would that constitute a legally enforceable decision internationally? I think that's the next big question to ask.
So much for that detail. Okay, I was waiting for a cue here. Do we have time for one more? We have one more question in the audience, please. Over to table 18. Table 18, who's manning the mic? Thank you very much.
Hi. So it has long been touted that the decentralization and NFTs are there also to help the poor section, the economically weaker section, the unbanked section of the people. How much do you think that has been proved true, or do you think it's still in the hype and hasn't reached its potential yet to serve the poorer and the weaker section?
Yeah, I would say that
Go ahead.
we're still in the early parts of the adoption cycle. And I think that, much like DeFi, I'll go back to the first time I ever used Aave. And I sat there and I was like, oh my God, this is really going to change the world, right? Being able to take a collateralized loan without any KYC within 5 minutes. Like to me, that was incredible. And I think we're going to start seeing the same thing as, let's say, transaction costs come lower, as more and more assets come online. And I guess I'll use this opportunity to also really elaborate on what I mean by everything in the real world is an NFT, so that you can think about it as things come on chain. Whereas, okay, if I have $1 and you have $1 and we were to exchange dollars, we have the same value. They're fungible, right? Now, if I'm wearing this t-shirt and you're wearing the same exact t-shirt, they're not necessarily the same value, right? Depending on, maybe my shirt has a stain, it has a rip, it's been worn. Yours can be in brand new. So technically those things are non-fungible. And now when you start bringing that into the digital world, then you're going to start seeing, yes, for sure, there will be collectibles that are part of the hype cycle. And I think, let's be honest, the only reason we're sitting here and talking about NFTs today is because of everything that happened last year, right? If we didn't have this insane explosion in asset prices, we probably wouldn't be talking about NFTs right now. But I do think as we start going more and more mainstream, and I think we're seeing this, with the entry of major players like Nike, Adidas, Starbucks, as they start to integrate these NFTs into their platforms, we're going to start seeing, NFTs that are free, right? For instance, if you were to ever meet me in person, I would give you an NFT for free. I hand out collabs, which are NFTs that are free. There's no cost to mint them. And I think, when we start seeing mass adoption of these technologies, that's when prices will be coming lower. And again, I think that's a function of, one, adoption, but then two, transaction costs. But I think ultimately, in my opinion, that it is inevitable that we start seeing it spread across all assets, all classes.
Let me also add a couple of thoughts here. I think the evidence is mixed. Right? Mixed because on one hand, if you actually look at the demographics of people that actually use crypto, it's mostly, high educated, tech savvy, young people in urban environment. So on the other hand, if you actually look at one of the best use cases of crypto is in remittances. Remittances are still very, very expensive if you use traditional means. And if you use crypto and other digital payments, they're a lot cheaper. And so that directly benefits lower income people. Also, in many developing countries, there are more people owning crypto than owning stocks. And so this tells you that this new technology can be very inclusive when it comes to owning digital assets. And so if I think about a future where you have tokenized securities, then I can see how people will be able to, there's a lot of talk in economics about how not enough people invest in the stock market. And I believe that by using blockchain technology and crypto, we might be able to actually expand this pie of people that are going to, that right now are not investing, but hopefully in the future they will be investing in the stock market through crypto.
Great thoughts to close on. We're at time, everybody. So I'd like to thank our guests near and far for joining us today and sharing their insights and perspectives on these fascinating issues. If you'd kindly give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.